I guess I would say that the future is here now. It's the famous quote. It's just not evenly distributed yet. Right? So there are copywriters who have already lost jobs to ChatGPT. Right? There's freelancers who are like, oh, I just lost my biggest marketing client because they can summarize their own podcasts without me by feeding the transcript to ChatGPT. Right? There's game designers who went to school for 3D modeling, and now their boss is like, just type some words into a thing and it'll do the rest. And they're like, oh, why did I go to school? This is what I loved, right? So Suzanne's right that we're starting to see some painful stuff happening. Illustration is another example. Um, it's getting really easy for any of us to generate pretty competent illustration, and it begs the question of would you pay somebody thousands of dollars for a custom illustration anymore?
Hello, everyone. In this episode, I'm talking to Kirk Clyne and Suzanne Reeves, who both have experience as creative directors, designers, and design team leaders. They share their career stories and their new venture, Design Unicorn, where they want to share the latest AI developments, specifically in relation to designers and design world. Obviously, we discuss AI and its impact on the future of design profession, as usual, and whether AI could understand psychology and be creative. We discuss risks of companies over optimizing for conversion rates and ROI, and what this can mean for the future of user experience, and how you can use ChatGPT to prepare for job interviews, and a lot more. This was a very interesting conversation. Hope you enjoyed. Welcome, Suzanne and Kirk. How are you?
Fantastic.
Thanks for having us.
Yes, I was looking forward to this very hot topic to discuss, and thank you for coming into my show. And as experts in AI, I'm really hope to learn a lot about what's coming. What should I, as a designer, get prepared for? And again, like this is all speculation, right? And like the predictions, but it's always exciting to kind of think about the future and the rose in the positive parts of this, and sometimes actually some things to consider when making next decision about the career move potentially, or what skills to learn, and which profession to go into, because yeah, changes are coming, and it's I don't think we can stop them. It's a matter of really adapting and making sure that we almost like anticipate what's coming to the best of our abilities and prepare ourselves for this future, right?
Absolutely.
You got it.
Awesome. Okay, so let's start with the big starting question about how you got into the design world, into the AI world. Where did you start? Because you both have very creative stories, like the creative career stories. And let's start maybe, Suzanne, with you. How did you get into this industry? What was your path? Because you also were involved in some entrepreneurship activities, from what I understand. And what do you do today?
Absolutely. So I did start out, I have a couple degrees that are not directly design related. I started out with a degree in psychology, and then I took a degree in fine art and at Emily Carr in Vancouver. And from there, I landed in design, mostly because I needed to have a job in the summer. And I ended up landing a graphic design job. And then I went, this changes everything. And so that was sort of the path that got me into design. And I went the in-house route and worked for a large international urban planning and engineering firm, and ended up being the in-house design leader eventually at that firm, growing my team to be about 10 designers, developers, illustrators, working on really large scale projects, international, like the master plan for Mecca in Saudi Arabia. Taking design direction from the King of Saudi Arabia was a very interesting experience. Let me tell you that, indirectly, but nonetheless, straight from his mouth. From there, I left to start my own design studio. I wanted to work with social purpose businesses and really feel like I was making really close to the impact of the work that I was doing. So I did a lot of branding and website design. I got into no code, so I never had to hire a developer in order to run for 10 years a design business that mostly focused on branding and website design, and then into app design. So that was very exciting. I got to work on a mental fitness app for teens, for instance, and encouraged that team and was part of the decision to shift from traditional coding of that into a no code environment. And now I'm shifting and starting a business with Kirk because of this. The last 2 years, we've been paying attention to AI and what we see coming. We're like, once again, I'm having that this changes everything experience. So we are shifting gears to focus on AI and design, the intersection of the two.
That's a couple of questions here. First of all, you mentioned that you started using no code tools before, as I understand, like looking at timeline, before it was even popular or it was really that advanced, right? That's impressive. So yeah, you're like from the starting of this whole industry, you've been experiencing this, like, and using this. That's pretty cool. And also, like designing for Saudi Arabia. What was? Can you elaborate a bit more on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So my company had a urban planning group, and it was run by Steve Willis, who is now the chief planner of Ottawa, actually. And we did all sorts of different projects that were around community improvement, around city planning, and I would be on the design team that would help communicate the visions that the urban planners, and when we pair up with architects, we would need to find ways to communicate both visually and just in terms of the formatting, whether it's going to be a document or whether it's a presentation, or what do we need to create? Are we creating video? And so it's really communicating these ideas around city building and how to create sustainable environments and communities. And I was part of the group that I led actually the proposal to get the job with to do the master plan for Mecca, and we won. It was a long shot. Nobody actually thought we were going to land it, but we did. I did the proposal looked like a coffee table book. I went all out on this thing, and not that that's why we won, but I'm sure it didn't. It helped. It helped with that. And then we worked on that. Honestly, I was on that project for 3 years, and we had to do things like adapt the size of the document because there's things like when you're in the desert, your eyes actually have difficulty with certain colors because of the impact of the sun. And so I'd had a certain style of the colors that they really couldn't see, and so that type of feedback was coming back, or about the size. They didn't want to have to put on glasses to read, they wanted to be easy to read everything. So I had instructions like make the font size 12-point font, which, if you're trying to create like a high-end sophisticated document, something with like large font does not necessarily achieve that look. So I made it like massive. We ended up going like the page size were these documents. So we're like, I think over 20 volumes in total of these really huge documents. But again, in this kind of like coffee table style look and feel, and all the graphs and all the maps, lots of maps. And how do you work with the GIS department to communicate things visually? So yeah, it was a very interesting project, and did that for three years. It was a huge part of my career that was a big, wonderful team that we got to work with, and a great team of designers, but also like put me into a different echelon of like who wanted to work with me after taking on a project like that.
Yeah. I just want to say, I bet this definitely helped your portfolio and just the price range of your services, right?
Yes,
It sounds
yeah.
like a good testimonial of trust and dealing with complexity and probably difficult stakeholders, clients. So it's definitely probably you learned a lot of valuable skills from that experience, right?
Absolutely.
Two more comments, and then I would like to hear Kirk's story as well. First of all, psychology education, I would not say that it's not relevant to design. There's like really fundamental to just humans, and as a part of designing for humans, I think that's super relevant. So I've worked with people who had the education in psychology, definitely really deep thinkers and very aware of all the cognitive biases and really nuances of how our brains work and what people what drives people. So I think it's super valuable. And the last comment is graphic designer as a summer job. That sounds like a dream for a summer job. I would not complain.
Well, you have to understand, I was quite the risque rebel artist at the time. My thesis advisor wouldn't even come to my final art show because it was so out there. So to take a job in graphic design, Kirk has a good story about this too. But the idea of selling out, right, using your skills for commercial purposes, really. And do you mind if I use your
Go for it.
yeah, somebody said to him once, "Don't think of it as selling out, think of it as cashing in." And I thought, "Okay." And then I realized I could actually harness all the skills that I had as being a designer and from psychology. You're right. I do think that they're very relevant um, to have a design career. And interestingly, I beat out a lot of designers, I was told, for the job because my portfolio was far more interesting than my other people who had came in with their mock-ups of products, and I came in with some very interesting art layouts that had to do with artwork that captured the creative director's attention, let's say. And he's like, if I have to be stuck in a room all summer with someone, you seem like the better bet. So yeah, you never know what path you're going to get to that'll lead to that first job. And then I was very excited and very grateful for the fact that I got that design job because it was incredibly, not the job per se, but the overall, the career has been incredibly satisfying.
Probably a good kickstart of the career. Yeah. How about you, Kirk? What really brought you to this creative world?
Well, growing up, I'd always been drawing. I think I was like 10 or something when somebody brought home a square pad of paper. My mom was working at a vet clinic, and it was a piece of swag from a pharma company that made stuff for dogs, and it had a little animation on it. If you flipped it, this dog would go running across the page. I was like, "Oh, it's so cool!" And I flipped it over, and I did my own like shark attack movie on there. I ended up making tons of these, so I was always interested in like drawing and animation and things of that nature. And then um, I'm going to date myself now because this was in like the 90s. You know, my dad would always have like a PC around, and I started to learn how to code in BASIC. But the reason I was coding was so that I could draw. I'd be like, oh, you can plot a circle and you can tell it the size. And then if you put two more circles, you get eyes. And then if you make a loop and you move those eyes, you can actually make an animation. And so I've always kind of been immersed in this weird intersection of technology and creativity where I'm trying to use the computer to make, cool interactive stuff. I used to program little text adventure games and things. It wasn't until the late 90s I was bartending. And I was not working in a design capacity at all because I thought it was selling out, as Suzanne said, until my assistant bartender said, no, think of it this way. And I ended up doing some freelance work, working on like children's books and stuff, interactive things like the Arthur series that some of your listeners may have seen growing up or whatever. And then I started teaching actually because I should say I had girlfriend whose roommate saw my cartoons that I was drawing, my comics. And he's like, we got to scan these in and animate them. I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, we can do this. Come here. And he showed me how to start scanning stuff. And then I discovered Photoshop and I was like, oh, wow, this is something else entirely. And as soon as I got into that, I discovered 3D. And I was like, oh, wait, whoa, I can make Toy Story? Like, that just changed everything. And then when I realized I could make things interactive and I could make sounds and I could have you click on things and surprise you and all the rest, I was like, and it had undo. Like I never looked back. I thought I was going to become some kind of like commercial illustrator. And instead I got seduced by just all the multimedia side of things. Um, and then I started teaching around that time. I started teaching some 3D and some Photoshop for the Academy of Art College and from San Francisco State University. So I did that for like 10 years. And I should say that I was like totally self-taught at that point. Calvin's joining the meeting. Hi, Calvin. Give you a quick moment on camera. That's all you get. So I've been self-taught just out of interest and passion. Like I was just already doing this, and somebody was like, "I'm giving up my 3D course, and you should teach it." I was like, "What are you talking about?" He's like, "You can totally do this," and he was right. And I turned out I loved teaching, so I was doing that for a number of years. The restaurant closed. I lost my golden handcuffs of all those tips and lovely food that I was getting, and I ended up freelancing. And I ended up freelancing. I was in San Francisco at the time, so I will recognize my privilege of being a white dude in the right place at the right time and getting opportunities to work at startups and help them prototype their vision of the future. And I worked at one where I was like the 14th person they brought on, and they were talking about the future of sports and what if you could pull in all this data and you could like watch people climb Everest, but they would swallow a heart transponder and you could actually see their heart rate and you could see their elevation. You could track them on GPS. This was like really visionary stuff. And they're like, you need to design it. Here's a chicken scratch, like this. I don't know. That turned out to be like the first half of my career was a lot of going into these startups where they had big, lofty, ambiguous creative ideas and trying to give shape to their crazy, right? And I would develop the presentation support that they could use to get funding. And so that particular company ended up going public. They had relationships with Nike, Kodak, Volvo, folks like that. They ended up in a bid to cover the Olympics online, which the world was not ready to figure out those licensing rights, so it didn't happen. They blew up. They were about 150 when I left. And a year later, they were like 450. And then like 3 months later, they were gone. And that was very, very common in San Francisco, these like meteoric rises, and then they would just kind of explode, right? So I didn't have my first in-house full-time role until I moved to Toronto in 2000. And then I was at a digital learning shop. So we would develop courses for like Deloitte and Avis and folks like that, pharma companies, to train their execs or train their staff. And after a while, the creative director and I broke off and we became our own agency. And for a few years, we were white labeled to big agencies. So we had always been digital. And as the bigger, well-established agencies like McLaren McCann and Tribal and those folks started to approach digital, they didn't have the skills in-house. And so they would come to us when they didn't know how to pull it off technically, or they needed really great UX, or like the timelines were totally crazy. We could do it. But we eventually fired all of them because we could not affect strategy. We'd say like, hey guys, you missed this great opportunity. You could do this, and that would raise the eyeballs on that. Yeah, Clyne already signed off. Just get it done. And we were like, well, you're taking their money and you could have made it better. And like, where's your integrity? And so, yeah, we got really upset with all of that. And we fired them all. We became our own agency. We started doing some work for the likes of TIFF and Starbucks. And we ended up doing a lot of experiential. So I started building websites before 2000. I have done a lot of websites at this point. And so in the 2005, 6, 7, 8, as the iPhone and Facebook and Twitter and all these things started coming out, we started moving into experiential. And so we were building like video booths with a touch screen where you could leave a recording, or like interactive video walls you could play with. And I love solving those UX challenges, right? There's a lot of challenges on the screen, and there's a lot of solutions you can use over and over. But when you're trying to figure out sight lines for a box that's got a fog machine and 3D renders inside and like it changes your mind on all of that. So I found that really, really compelling. And I stayed with that agency for many years. And then I broke off just because we started going a little too far into advertising, and there's frankly just not enough design juice for me. Like advertising campaigns are kind of about concept, image, message, but not really design in the same way. And I found myself longing to like go back to explaining things to people or demystifying digital or giving shape to the crazy. So yeah, so I broke off, and now Suzanne and I are building a business between the two of us where we can sort of help designers and help educate them. And we've got a newsletter, and maybe we can talk about that a bit later.
Actually, I think it makes sense to, because like it's almost like a lead for this like the current chapter of your career, like of both of your careers. So let's touch on this current venture that you're on working on, and just again, like in the high level terms, what exactly do you do? Who's your target audience? Like, what's really the value proposition?
Yeah, I'm sure Suzanne can speak to this. I'll kick it off roughly and just say we were both in our off hours playing with AI. right? For the last couple of years, I'd be sitting in the living room playing with Midjourney and DALL-E and whatever, and she'd be in another room playing with DALL-E and Midjourney, and like we'd come together and compare notes, and then we'd talk to designers that we worked with, and it wasn't even on the radar. And the more that we played with the tools, the more we realized, wow, this stuff is really powerful. It's on the one hand not as powerful as the hype would tell you, and it's also like 10 times more powerful in some ways than people are willing to give it credit for. A lot of people are kind of writing it off right now, and we're finding that no, if you can get to know how to use these tools, you can kind of exponentially change what you're able to offer as a designer. I'm somebody who taught myself how to do HTML and CSS and stuff back in the day. I'm now somebody who's, I used to do generative art and learn how to do coding and things like Unity and game design. And now it's about AI for me. Like I'm always going to find that next thing that's interesting. And here I am immersed in it, seeing this kind of future and seeing that a lot of people in our industry are either in denial or just not aware. And as people who have been leaders, who have supported our designers, who mentor regularly, we're like, these are our people, and they're going to get blindsided by this technology, and they're going to get cut out of some really important conversations as how we do things start to change. And so we thought, you know what, let's put together like a newsletter on why you need to care about this. And the traction has been really astonishing. Like our open rates are super high. Our audience is growing really fast. And we think it's partly because for all the chatter out there, there's not much, there's a lot of like tech bro chatter. There's not a lot of empathetic creatives who have been in your shoes, who kind of know what's coming and who can help you navigate that and empathize with your situation. So we like to think that we're a little bit of a unique voice that way.
Yeah, I would say that our target audience started as the designers that we know and love. And when we were doing our experiment and really realizing, especially in the last 6 months or so, as we saw the quality of the tools increasing exponentially, we really wanted to make sure that the designers that we've worked with, that we care about, were actually going to be able to keep up and not get left behind. And the way we look at it as, we don't think that people are going to lose their jobs, for instance, to a robot, but they might lose their job to another designer who's using AI strategically and effectively. So that's sort of that area where we're like, let's make sure, let's start a newsletter, let's put it out there, and we'll see, right? We don't know. We didn't know who would be interested. Maybe we're the ones that were obsessed with it and it wouldn't catch on, but that's proving, we're definitely getting proved wrong in that. There are certainly a lot of designers that as they start to get a taste and start to hear about what's really possible from a design perspective, not just the hype that's in the news, but actually from people who are using it and who have a sense of, can help them walk through the smoke and mirrors. There's so much smoke and mirrors right now with tools out there that have these like slick demos, but nothing's actually been built yet. If you know the tech community at all, you're like, I know what this means. This means you want to know whether or not any of us would be interested. So I'm going to sign up, but I don't know if you'll ever show up and deliver on this. And when you do, I don't know what it's going to look like. So having that, the fact that we're obsessed, we're like, well, we should just start sharing the things that we're learning. We aren't, as much as, we started out saying we're AI experts on here, and certainly we've been called that, we would both be first people to tell you that right now, other than people who are actually building AI, the people who are using it, none of us are true experts, right? Like this is, we're all going to Mars together.
Like it or not.
Yeah, like it or not, we're on our way to Mars and we're trying to figure out how to do things. And some of it we're trying to port from home and see if we can set it up on Mars the way we like it, and realizing, oh, that doesn't work here. Or maybe it does work, but there's an even better way that we had never could have figured out before using our Earth tools or our Earth knowledge. And it's this sort of like, on a new journey, on a new adventure that we look at and say, hey, we're on the journey and we might be a little bit further ahead than where you're at. And we're happy to share the things that we're learning. but all of us are really learning this together, and that's the exciting part. So we're really looking for people. We're starting out with a newsletter. Long term, we could see it becoming a community. I think it'd be amazing for people to come together and start creating together. If we want to even be remotely capable of competing when the robots really get going, then each one of us working one at a time is not going to get us there. But if we collectively come together and share our knowledge with one another and share what's possible, we believe that that's the way that we're all going to level up much faster. So we'll raise our hands and be the first ones to jump in the fray and say, hey, this is what we're up to. This is what we're seeing. This is how to try these things yourself. We do hope longer term that we will be able to get more people coming together, want to create with one another and share our knowledge.
Yeah, and I just wanted to echo, Suzanne's. I wanted to say at the beginning, like, we definitely don't try to position ourselves as experts. I think that's disingenuous at this point. It's way too early for anybody to be an expert in what's a fast-changing field. If you're paying attention, if you're on some newsletters or you're on some Reddit threads, there's like 37 new apps a week, and most of them are garbage, but you wouldn't know from the way that they're talked about. And so we try to go in there and figure it out. And we sort of take this attitude of like, this is exhilarating and terrifying and empowering all at the same time, right? Like, we're not trying to say like, we got this, follow us. We're saying like, yeah, we're a bit spooked too, and we're trying to get ahead of this and make sure that we can kind of angle to be the ones who are wielding the tools and using it strategically. But I think we take that sort of humble approach to it.
So it's not like one of those hundreds of new Twitter bio descriptions, the AI guy or the AI guru.
Right.
Exactly.
I think I say AI wrangler on my LinkedIn, which is like, I'm trying to lasso cows. That's the best I got right now.
Yeah, I think you're totally right. So it's definitely a huge unknown new field, right? That can go, frankly, any direction. Could go sideways. Who knows? But trying to, and I think you're trying to solve a valid problem with this newsletter and trying to kind of be slightly ahead of this information curve, so to say, and share like specifically for design community, for design world. I've noticed this myself as well when I'm trying to, because I've been also following this field, trying to understand again with this framing what really the future of UX will look like in the age of AI, right? And trying to really again speculate and like make my bets and so on, and trying to future-proof my career potentially. And yeah, there is like it's everybody's just guessing, but the pace of innovation and the change is, I would say, it's a mixed bag of emotions of like scary, because what if we'll not be able to stop at some point, and but also kind of really looking at the advancement and like the quality of the outputs, right? And how quickly you can you can really save a lot of time as a designer, as a creative, when using these tools. Just a matter of time. And like I think you mentioned, Kirk, earlier, that it's a matter of not just using these tools but knowing what to ask of these tools, right? Like, and because like the whole and I think I saw one of the positive sides of this AI developments recently, that new jobs are showing up, like particularly like prompt specialist or something.
Yes.
Which is like,
yes.
I would
Prompt
never think.
engineer.
Exactly, yeah, engineer. I would never really guess that this would be, but could potentially be a source of income, like a profession, right? But looking at some of the examples, how intricate and how detailed and how, yeah, I would never even think of this, right? Like when they, even I saw some examples with like visuals. I think one of the one that stuck in my memory more than others was when somebody, I think used Mid Journey or maybe DALI, to generate a few images of the Pope in
Yes.
Balenciaga, I
In
think,
the
or
puffy
something.
jacket. Yes.
And there's like the up to the point, like even like the aperture settings of the lens, that it's ridiculous. And it definitely shows like that it takes some skill to be able to achieve that result. not just kind of like basic caricature looking images like I would create. But yeah, it definitely an interesting wave that you're kind of trying to ride before, I guess, the mainstream of designers, and sharing what you learn. I think it's very interesting. I'm gonna take a look about the uh, into the newsletter. Talking about let's talk about this AI world, AI topic. So, and the future of the design world, and the future of the design profession, and what what have you seen? What really what's your gut feeling? What exactly, how AI will impact the future of being a designer?
So, one of the questions that I ask the designers and creative directors that I've been talking to is, how worried are you that robots are going to take our jobs and impact it at the wider scale, right? Industry level. And I ask them 0 to 5. So, if I could ask you, where would you put it? If you say 0 is not worried at all, and 5 being like, that's absolutely happening, where would you put your what's your bet on that?
I would answer with a question. What timeline are we talking about?
This is good. I would say let's say 5 years. That's not right away. That's a genuine impact.
5 years, I would say, looking at the current developments and the pace and what I understand, because my background and education is like information systems, computer kind of science mix. So I have, I guess, fundamental understanding of the technology, and again, not AI technology, but kind of still coding and like all the systems and like how it works. And I'm quite optimistic from the point of view that AI will be able to do more than people think. So I would say 5 would be my answer for the 5 year timeline.
You're the first person who said 5, um, maybe with the exception of us. Right? We're both a 5 on that. It's absolutely going to happen. Um, I would say it's. I think the impact on the design industry as a whole is going to be similar to. If I had to make my prediction, this is absolutely my prediction, is that it's going to be very similar to before computers and after computers. So graphic design was around before, it will be around after. However, who is going to be attracted to that? Who is going to have the skills to succeed? I think will be very different, right? If graphic design was still cut and paste, I wouldn't be a designer. I wouldn't have that wouldn't have been interesting to me, and I wouldn't have been very good at it. Where as soon as I got into computers, then that became, oh, I can do 100 different versions of this, and it doesn't matter that I'm not perfect with these kinds of lines. That was a totally different game. I think with what we're seeing with AI, it's going to be the same. The type of work is going to be different. The skills that will matter will be different. And what you're passionate about, it's very painful because I think for some people, their thing that they love may not be as much of a career path as it once was. And for other people that may even have been inside places, so maybe they're more of a product designer, like in a UX capacity, for instance, they might be all of a sudden taking over things that they used to have a UI companion with them, that now that's they're curating the response that's being created by an AI system, and they're like, yeah, this is good UX and this gets a check of approval. Maybe there's somebody else who has more of an aesthetic sensibility that's involved as well. But I could see people shifting somewhat where they go in their careers. So that's my sense. I don't know exactly how it's all going to play out, but I suspect it'll be as big as that impact was, and will shake up jobs similarly. That it may be very different people, and some people will be like loving it and just going on to the next phase of their career.
I mean, I guess I would say that the future is here now. It's the famous quote. It's just not evenly distributed yet, right? So there are copywriters who have already lost jobs to ChatGPT. Right? There's freelancers who are like, oh, I just lost my biggest marketing client because they can summarize their own podcasts without me by feeding the transcript to ChatGPT. Right? There's game designers who went to school for 3D modeling, and now their boss is like, just type some words into a thing and it'll do the rest. And they're like, oh, why did I go to school? This is what I loved. Right? So Suzanne's right that we're starting to see some painful stuff happening. Illustration is another example. um, it's getting really easy for any of us to generate pretty competent illustration, and it begs the question of would you pay somebody thousands of dollars for a custom illustration anymore? In terms of the future, I think Suzanne's right. It's going to be shifting roles. I think we're going to see jobs disappear. We may also see new jobs appear. Right, that happened in the desktop revolution. That happened in the web revolution. It seems inevitable again now. I think Suzanne touched on this idea of moving a little bit more toward curation, less so than creation. Like, do I need to spend a week coming up with 3 homepage designs on my own, or could I get a system to generate 50 and then I pick 3 that I want to refine further and I go home early, right? So there is that promise of removing a lot of the repetitive rote work and moving you more into a place where, as a designer, it's your taste, it's your sensibility, it's your understanding of psychology, it's your understanding of the users, what's on brand, what's not. Like, it's all of that stuff where maybe anybody else could push that button, but it doesn't mean that they understand what a good solution or an appropriate solution looks like versus the first thing that the machine farted out, right? So I think in a sense, some of the promise there is moving away from the repetitive tasks and more into what I call big D design, sort of the bigger thinking, which is ultimately what it's always been about, right? I think at least for a lot of us, it's about solving the right business problem. It's about empathy for the user. It's about fit for the business, fit for the brand. It's these bigger questions that design touches on and tries to weave together that I think will remain valuable. But as we as we think about the future of where like UX might be going, we put out an article a little while ago that I think you saw, Kirill, that was about the example was, I was chatting with a friend of mine who's like a technical director, project manager, and we were sort of talking about the future of UX and UI. And I was like, these machines can generate imagery and they can generate copy. And we're getting to the point where they can generate web layouts, or so they're promising. We're getting there quickly. And it kind of begs this question to me of like, does a website have to be the same for everybody? And I sort of came up with this future idea where like some 20-year-old kid in Toronto sees a campaign ad for a bank, hits the link, goes to a landing page and sees a bunch of fun, cool illustrations with lots of gradients and everything's really edgy and the humor's a bit edgy and everything, it feels like his people. And then at the same time, like a woman of color in Vancouver hits the same landing page and she sees photographs of people who look like her, and the tones are all pulled from the brand palette, but it's all the warm tones and everything feels a softer and more secure, and the language is really to the point and clean, right? So it's the same site, but based on your cookie trail and everything else, it's offering up a different experience. And no designer sat down and designed those 2 experiences, but there may be designers involved in setting up that system. How do those rules work? How do we learn about the user in non-invasive ways? How do we respect privacy? How do we assume the user's intent or offer them the right things at the right time? And I think as we get further down this road, we're going to see more and more and more personalization in apps. And that's going to become a real UX challenge, is how do you design apps that are sort of responsive to user needs moment by moment? And going even further, there's this notion of one-off apps. And the example I use is like you've got 6 people coming to town on different days, and this one has food allergies, and that one doesn't like the beach, but these people want to see this monument. How do I create a schedule? And you say all this to your AI, and it goes, here's an app for you. Plug in these things, and let me ask you a few questions. And then it gives you a calendar, and then it dies because you never need that app again. It was a one-off thing to solve this particular problem, right? I think that's a super interesting possibility. But again, like, where does the design, I think there's a lot of design rules and things that we can lean on in terms of best practices around UI and accessibility. But I think there's a lot of stuff behind the scenes there in terms of how do you make a system like that work and work successfully and work in every instance for every user. And like, these are whole new questions and whole new roles that I don't think any of us are even really starting to think about yet.
Yeah, scary and and exciting.
Yeah. This is
It's
what we keep saying, right? It's
mixed
both.
feelings. Talking about like that, the judgment, right? And this almost like the what makes humans unique and what makes humans different from machine, in particular the current generative AI tools, is that we can judge if it's good or bad, if it's right or wrong. So it's kind of not really just text spitting out, right? And talking about design, I think it's like I like your example about instead of me creating as a designer, me creating like 3 different layouts, I can have like AI generate 50, and then I choose 3 and work on them, right? And then I think it's totally possible, and it's just a matter of time, that systems will be able to connect to like usability testing platforms like user testing. In that case, why do I have to choose this like the winning layout? Like you run experiments, you can already automate this test creation. There's like a huge pool of users that can be obviously will be growing, and I'm sure there are many other tools that can just you can like connect in a network, right? And then they can just generate like maybe like there is a product manager in a company who would sketch something on a whiteboard, take a photo, and then this generates 50 layouts, submits 50 different tests, right? Or like hundreds, I don't know. And then like analyzes the results because it's all kind of structured data. And then I don't know, here's the top winner with this segment. And I think it's already I mean, with some manual setup, I think it can be done.
It's already happening.
This is already happening. If you look at some of the things that Google was coming out with on their ad platform, for instance, we just did a post on that. They're already generating ads this way, where the question mark is, where does the creative sit in this mix? Because they are already giving you the options. They're putting it together in a layout. They're writing your copy. They're using data to say these are the better options for your copy and whatnot. At what point can they not also do that for like what the imagery should be? So at what point is it not the guy in marketing, in performance marketing, who is being like, yep, this one's good, all the data says this is the right choice? I would say, however, that, we talked about psychology before, and while the robots, ChatGPT is getting very, very good already at sort of anticipating what we will say, word after word after word. But that's not quite the same thing yet, at least, as at understanding the nuances of how people think and how people behave. And those aspects are what I think future proof a bit UX designers, because they're really thinking about it with a human user understanding. Even if you ask ChatGPT, and I'm not saying ChatGPT is the expert on the future, but I find it interesting that even its answer, perhaps because it's what humans are all saying, but will come back to computers are never really going to understand humans the way humans do. And that fundamental truth, I think, has to be contemplated. I think that for us, the part that's scary is how much does capitalism care about the nuances? If it can get the like dollars and cents right, then is mimicry fine, even if they're not actually creating the best or the most intense experience. However, at the same time, I talked with one creative director, TJ, recently, who I just loved it. She's like, "Oh, I want to dive into all this so I can figure out how to like do it even better than the AI." And that was her. She's like, "Of course, this is going to bring level it everything up, so you can program in the, what are the good design principles and all of these types of things. But then, how are we as humans going to look at all of these different things, and how are we going to combine them in the way that humans do, which are bizarre and not necessarily like obvious things, how we might create something new?" And that's her, from her perspective, was that's that top echelon is where some of us designers should be aiming for. right? Is that like, how can you take the tools and then combine them in ways or use them in ways that not even the developers have thought of, and create things that come out of it that still keep you in a space of competitive design and creativity. So, and I think that that's also fair, right? Like there is something to be said for what people do creatively, that the tools are always going to be created for a certain intention, and humans creativity is not always for a business intention, right? Like we've got the wild card there that they may not have, may not be in the programming. So that's sort of, as you can see, we don't have like it's definitely changing. Exactly in what way, which pathway are we going down? Ultimately, still completely up for grabs, but we can certainly see a lot of different ways. And for us in the here and now, we want to position ourselves and design as a whole. That's why we're doing the newsletter. That's why we're on this podcast. That's why we are reaching out to other designers, is to say, be proactive. Don't get left behind. Get involved in the conversations at your office. Get involved in the conversations at the executive level if you have the capability of doing so. Be in the room when these decisions are made. Show people, start working and creating things that you're like, I never would have thought of that. Have the people who are going to make those decisions say, I know who I want to have in control of these tools, and it's this person and that person and this person in our organization who have already shown that they're going to do way more than this, way more than these tools than anybody else we can think of in our organization. That's a very like tactical and strategic approach, but that's how I'm positioning myself, is to be one of the people at the forefront of figuring out how to use the tools and showing and proving that designers should be the ones wielding be in the room and being involved in the decisions that come up around how we should be using the tools and what's going to create the best outputs.
Suzanne mentioned this new Google's new Performance Max ad platform. You feed it an existing landing page, and it recommends headlines and keywords. It pulls images that could fit. It will generate images for you. And then it's got a chatbot. You can say, why don't we focus more on this benefit? It'll go, okay, here's new headlines for you. And meanwhile, it's got a rating for every ad. And this, for us, this begs the question of like, so wait, do any creatives need to be involved here? Because to your point, Kirill, like if we've got the data and if Google can say this is more successful than that, then maybe we're not in the room. But it also begs the question of, does performance marketing need to be doing it? Why isn't it just the guy in the accounts who's got the relationship with the client? Like there's nothing that the guy in performance marketing is going to lend over necessarily the guy in accounts. But I think the creatives do have something to lend that neither of them can, that we've got a background, we've got a training, we've got a mindset that actually is different, right? And so we also see for every new tool like this that comes out, as TJ said, in a sense, it elevates all boats, meaning now Suzanne and I could turn around and offer a digital campaign with a fair amount of confidence that it would be successful because we've got Google helping us pick the right keywords and the right headlines and everything else, right? So, maybe there's certain jobs I wouldn't take on because they require too much copy and I don't have a copywriter I could use, but now I could use ChatGPT and it could get me 85% of the way there and I can massage it from there, right? So we're sort of finding that with every one of these examples, even though it looks like it's changing the landscape, it's not necessarily changing it in your favor or not in your favor. There may be ways that you can now start to offer more than you used to and leverage these tools in ways that let you compete with bigger shops, just even as an independent, right? And the last thing I wanted to mention is in terms of the future of UX and UI and all the rest, copy feels like it's one of the first ones that's already sort of getting sucked up by the robots a bit. UI is close behind it because we have so many standards in a responsive web context in particular. You've got really just certain boxes you need to tick. There's only so many ways to do things and have it usable. I feel like UX is probably the furthest. It's the safest. It's the furthest from the edge of the cliff because you can ask, for example, ChatGPT to generate personas. You can say, hey, give me 3 personas for a healthcare app. And it'll go, sure, Sarah's a busy mom with 3 kids. And if you don't know what you're doing, it sounds pretty good. But it's not actually based on anything, right? And a real designer might be able to figure that out fairly quickly and say, you know what, why don't we go do some real interviews, right? And we can talk about how we've leveraged some of that work as well by actually doing the design work, giving it, or doing the research, giving it to ChatGPT, and then building on that by sort of interacting with those personas. So that's just sort of a long-winded way of saying it feels like for every little strike or little mark against all the different creative professions out there with each new tool, there's also new opportunities that seem to come with them, as long as you've got that mindset where you're willing to embrace it and learn it and not put your head in the sand.
Yeah. It's a very, very, very tricky topic. And maybe the reason why I have a bit more concerned opinion about that, and maybe the reason I'm not, maybe I'm underestimating the complexity of what humans can bring, like basically the human touch that machines cannot replicate, right? But maybe on the other hand, some of my courses in university, specifically systems modeling, like simulations, and there was another one that's relevant, math modeling as well. So basically, kind of the idea was that computer can generate different models, can run through different scenarios on its own with like initial setup, obviously, right? So, and what I understand right now with AI and how AI works, even AI developers don't understand how it really came up with this, right? It's just kind of really like I heard this from even AI researchers, like it's almost like a black box, right? So this is even like even more, I guess, like almost like next level of intelligence. I'm not saying like it's general, like not what's general, right?
AGI.
Not the AGI style, but still.
Yeah.
So talking about psychology, right? Or what you mentioned, Susan, that psychology does require a lot of deep understanding of of humans' brain, right? However, like for as an example, I was at some point I was really interested in cognitive biases, right? And basically what I was doing every week, I would take like 3 to 5 biases from Wikipedia full list, which is like hundreds or something, and I would read about this. I would kind of read more kind of studies and really understand how it works. And this was really exciting and interesting. And I went through not the whole list, but a big portion of it. And also I did kind of some certification usability analysis. So it's also ties to like memory constraints and like even motor function constraints, and just kind of connects to the psychology as well. And based on what I understand, again, not as an expert, but still kind of almost like self-educated semi-expert, I still think, and also combining to what I said about my learning about modeling and simulations and all that stuff and how computers work, and considering that the current AI, generative AI, is like, I don't know, 10 folds, 100 folds smarter in this kind of permutations, I wouldn't be surprised if it's possible to analyze all the psychological research over the decades, identify patterns of the behavior. Because if you really look at this, like we already identified like cognitive biases, which are patterns. It's like basically there is a condition, there is like maybe influences, and this is like the outcome, and we should be aware that basically our brain jumps to this outcome, right? This kind of shortcuts some thinking. I wouldn't be surprised if machine can really automate this part of the magic of psychology. And if you again tie it back to this kind of testing, right? And what you mentioned, like Google, this new tool. I'm really interested in this, in looking at this, because I need to do some work for the landing page right now. And I wouldn't be surprised if companies, it will become easier, or at least manageable, to set up by one person in the company. No need for the whole team to set up like a system. I'm not saying like it's like now, but maybe 3 years down the road, when these systems can talk to each other in a more smooth, like no developers needed way, right? Like no code kind of tools. And then they talk to each other. There's a generative system based on like all the understanding of the humans and how brains work, and like maybe market research, census data, I don't know, competitive research, because it can analyze. Like there's just, I think we're underestimate the analytical functions of AI. And like considering how fast it's improving, I wouldn't be surprised that it's, I don't think any profession is safe. And talking about what you said, Susan mentioned that, and I don't want to say like gloomy, but that's kind of my current thinking. I like what you said about almost like moving ourselves higher in the stack of decision making, when you almost like thinking through orchestrating systems, and this could be AI systems, could be other tools, could be, I don't know, anything, right? So it's, and I agree, this is definitely will require way more bigger systems thinking, and just kind of probably harder for AI systems to automate as quickly as generating text. However, again, thinking about like modeling and testing, and if you kind of really tie it to like A/B testing systems, based on like, I don't know, different target audiences, I think what I think will happen, and I'm afraid of that this will happen, that companies will start over optimizing on the conversion rate optimization, right? So, and we've seen actually not great examples with, I would say, some big tech companies, at least some of their products, when it's clear that it's not really delightful experience, right? It's not really like, it's almost like misses human touch in many places,
Right.
but I'm sure it
Right.
converts really well, better than like
Right.
something maybe more creative and more kind of delightful and human. So I'm afraid like the more and more companies will, especially with like more automation, will be going further away from creativity when they hire humans now, and there's like this crazy element of human brain that just generates weird stuff that may not be um, the best converter of the rates, but like because nobody tests it, like it just goes through. But like with automated testing, I think there will be higher risk of companies prioritizing ROI, right, and basically bottom line, than really creating this art and like more for the soul, for the human soul.
I
That's my
agree.
fear.
We both, this is, I think you've articulated very well what we think the doomsday scenario is, not the existential one that is also there with AI, or at least with AGI.
This requires a different episode. That's like a
Yes,
whole other conversation.
exactly. Not that doomsday scenario, but in terms of design, that would, yeah, I think you've done a really great job. I call it capitalism, but I think what you're talking about with that conversion, like that's my shorthand for saying exactly what you're talking about, is that if we are going to prioritize conversion rates over all else, then that is where we can run into scenarios that would lead down a path like that. Now, I would put a caution in there to think, we talked about biases before and psychology. I love the idea that using those two words together, I'm like, psychology is riddled, especially if you're going to take our history and what's been written down is riddled with bias, right? So all of our AI is like riddled with bias because they've learned off of all this stuff, and we're only as humans, as a culture, at the like cutting edge of trying to figure out our own biases and figure out how to work with them. And we don't all agree on what that should be either. So it definitely hasn't made it into the tombs of knowledge that AI is like learning itself on. And I think what that means is there is still going to be a miss. There's still going to be places where it misses for actually hitting home with a human, right? And is that possible someday for it to like figure it out, even if we don't understand why? It's like, you know us better than we know us. I think that's a possibility. But I do think that that's our edge. If there's an edge for us at all, I think our humanity is our edge, and that's that piece of the puzzle that we don't even always understand. What it is that we love so much about this one ad, for instance, over another. Why did that hit us right? And it's not going to work next year. It's this moment in time. And yes, I do think that it's possible for them to test it so fast, especially add quantum in there, right? Like, I can there won't be enough humans for it to test it on to go fast enough to know, perhaps, to do it instantaneously. But I think that that's where our playground's going to be. That's where we have to learn and figure out how much of that is going to matter. And so, as you talked about before, what are the skills? What's the future proofing skills? Knowledge of humanity, psychology, understanding, empathy, doing your design thinking, being really informed by that, regardless of where you are, whether you're an a UX designer or not, really steeping everything that you do in that type of thinking and that type of strategy, I think is the area that is going to help. The other piece of it is that humans still have to work with other humans. And so far, we tend to like working with humans. I actually adore ChatGPT, or especially. Um, so I find it actually delightful and have it like tell me bedtime stories and stuff like that. Like I really, it's another member of our team, but it's not going to understand all the nuances that happen in between like a meeting, or like, oh, you can't bring this up to Tony right now because he hasn't eaten, and we all know what he's like when he doesn't have his blood sugar, like have his smoothie yet. So all of those types of nuances of what it is to run a company, those are the things that I think are going to be harder for the robots to catch up to. Maybe they can do that too, but my sense is that all of that, the sort of the oil that makes all of it go, still has so much to do with humans and how humans are with one another. So I still think, despite the doomsday potential that our minds can see, I still think that humanity is going to be the gunk in that machine that's going to give us an edge, well, over the AI robot.
So if you take away anything from this interview, humans are gunk and oily gunk. Um, I just wanted to chime in and say, Kirill, as Suzanne said, you sort of hit it on the head. She calls it capitalism. I call it commerce. I'm like, if 85% good is good enough, then it's probably good enough. And it's going to be hard to argue against those numbers for a lot of places. You were talking about, oh, well, they can A/B test this and that. They absolutely can, and they can do it in real time. Like, we've got decades of heat map data that show us where do people look in a web page. And now there are plugins for Photoshop and Figma that will apparently show you in a design you're working on, here's where people might look. In my experience, they're not there yet. But in principle, that data is there to be learned from by an AI, and it can create stuff that it thinks has a very good bet of succeeding versus another layout, right? Or it puts it up and it goes, people aren't clicking on this button, I'm going to move it to here. I'm going to scoot it above the banner and then leave it for a day and see what happens, right? So I think you're right to a certain extent. All of that can be automated, but I think Suzanne's also right that you do risk losing something. And I think we may also, with a lot of these trends that get overhyped and adopted, we may see a pushback, right? There may become like a higher end of design, the hipster design, where you hire a real gunky human to actually design it because that matters to this brand, right? I think the other thing to keep in mind too is, in my own cynicism, I tend to look at things from what does capital care about, and yet design has fingers beyond that, right? There's social good programs, there's service design, there's program design, there's things that aren't necessarily super lucrative where it's about A/B testing this. It's about doing hardcore ethnographic research and trying to figure out how to solve real problems for immigrants or healthcare or things like that. Like, those are still all very valid places in design. It's just when you go to present your report to the committee, maybe you're getting an AI to help you design the deck. It doesn't mean that they were there for the whole ride, right? It's true. It's true. And the other thing is, whenever people bring up empathy and say like, well, but humans are empathetic and we know that Tony needs his blood sugar and all the rest. The thing that's really interesting is, I've heard AI researchers talk about how they are designing them to be empathetic, that they are basically designing them to be better humans than us, right? ChatGPT is never in a bad mood. ChatGPT does not need blood sugar hit before I work with it. ChatGPT is always like, that's a great idea. I'd love to work on that project. Like, it's so keen to do everything, right? And it's to the point where like, maybe humans get a little gunky to work with because Tony doesn't use blood sugar, or Tony has an onboard AI that tells everybody else's AI that this is not a good time to talk to Tony, right? There's that whole thing too, where you've got like this coach in your ear that's like, Tony, remember not to be a jerk. I think you should eat an orange because you have a meeting in 5 minutes, right? So like that empathy could actually be almost programmed into your daily life too as this onboard assistant. So there's so many places it could go.
Could be really useful to talk about some of our. We've talked a lot at the high level, but it'd be really great to get some talking about some of the tools that I think that people can use now in their UX jobs.
I think, yeah, let's go there now and talk about these tools, because I'm sure I keep seeing like every day there's like another 100 of new tools. I already lost track of. I even like stopped following all those compilations. So I would love to hear like from what you learned. One more comment though. So about what you said, Kirk, about ChatGPT, that it's always in a good mood. Sometimes it reminds me of Canadian communication style, when like it apologizes when, for
So
example, the answer
true.
like was not. I was like, it's like so kind. It's nice. I want to deal with you
So
more.
true.
I haven't thought about it, but you're right. It is so Canadian.
Yeah.
So true. There is an American plugin you can get if you want a little more edge, you know. It'll insult you now and again.
Yeah, but I mean, like it's kind of Canadian for Canadians, and like just as a general, like it feels kinder and nicer, right? But like it all really can differ in different cultures and communication preferences, right? So in Europe right now, like it's quite different, frankly. So people are like, at least from some countries, they're more direct. They just cut to the point, not like no sorry, nothing like this. So it's still fresh in my memory what was in Canada, and I was like, they are not rude. No, no, no. They're just kind of different communication style. So maybe actually they will activate a different, I know, style of the answers, right? Like to remove all these soft, like vague words. Yeah.
Or it goes the other way. Like I've thought about, somebody growing up with ChatGPT, every interaction is polite and every interaction is like, I think what you're saying is this, let me echo it back to you. And I'm like, if that's who you're interacting with all the time, does that change how you interact with people? Does it set expectations for all of us to
Yeah,
start
that's true.
behaving a bit like, you're not half as nice as ChatGPT, my best friend? Maybe you could,
Yeah,
work on
it's
yourself a
almost
little bit.
like an embedded, potentially hidden, or secretly embedded communication consultant or like coach, right?
Oh, but I literally had this idea a few years ago of like having a coach in your ear. You go to a meeting, you do your meeting, and after the meeting, it's like, I think you did a pretty good job, but when Suzanne was talking, you interrupted her, and that's something that we said we were going to work on. Meanwhile, you did this part well, and now you've got this ability to reflect on your behavior. And I mentioned this in a boardroom, and half the room was like, "Wow, that sounds so cool," and half the room was like, "God, no, I don't want anything like that."
I don't want to learn
And
anything new. I'm already
no,
perfect.
I don't want to. Don't tell me my faults. I'm happy enough
Yeah.
now.
I love this idea. I think it's actually potentially a good business idea.
Yeah, it is. I'm sure they're on it already. I am quite sure they're on it.
Especially like if you embed it like in all these conference tools that are already there with like text analysis, right? So it's not like you don't have to separate device, like all the Zooms, Slacks, everything.
There are already AI sales tools doing this where
Perfect segue into the tools, right? So let's talk about the tools. Tell us what's really amazing. What's outstanding. How can we make our lives easier today?
the first thing is to recognize that there's a lot of smoke and mirrors. There's a lot of hype. There's 1,000 plugins for Figma with AI in the title. None of them are any good. I'm not sure if any of them are any good. We've looked at some of the topmost ones and they seem pretty janky and they don't match the demo and the output isn't there. So if, as you said, you're feeling overwhelmed with everything that's out there, it's too early. The bigger players haven't risen to the top. We don't really know what's working yet. There's a lot of hype around it. And so if you feel overwhelmed, just recognize that you don't actually have to understand it all or take it all in. I think at this early stage, it's okay to kind of sit back and see what's rising to the top. And our big three right now are ChatGPT, Midjourney, Dali, and then it sort of trails off from there. There's different ones that are helpful, but don't worry about the 37 that are coming out every day because most of them are too early and they're just proof of concept and they're trying to get investment, etc.
And I wouldn't say that I came across a plugin on Figma the other day that actually I was like, okay, I'll play with this some more. That was generating wireframes from text prompts. It's not perfect. I wouldn't be like running around saying everybody should adopt this immediately, but I was like, it's useful, and especially not as much for UX designer. I actually think it's really useful for the people who will put us out of work. It's really great for the founder who's bootstrapping, who is trying to figure out where to spend their dollar, and maybe they don't need to have uh, a designer come in and figure things out if they can give in a few prompts and get them close enough to start their project. So that's where I see the immediate lose your jobs in those places, in those not big corporations, but in these small interactions where I think is where change happens faster, right? In the startup world. And so I do think there are tools, but it's a bit like, trying to find a hidden gem on Netflix. You can't really trust any of the ratings. You're not really sure until you get partway in. That's the reality that we're in now. Certainly, we would love to share one of the discoveries that we had working with ChatGPT, which is in many ways, people think of it as being overhyped. But what I keep discovering about ChatGPT is new ways that I hadn't thought to use it, and its value increases for me. So one of the examples, and this is a controversial one, is there are people who will be screaming at at me, and luckily I won't be able to hear them, but they'll be screaming saying, this is not, you shouldn't be doing this. But we created virtual interactive personas using ChatGPT. Now, we didn't do what is common. If you look out there, how to use ChatGPT as a UX designer, and people say, type in, as Kirk said earlier, type in, give me 3 personas for a healthcare app. And it'll give you things that sound like legitimate personas. And maybe there's even a bit of truth to them because it is pulling from lots of a material that somewhere in that might be truth, right? But it is not what a persona is supposed to be doing, which is giving you a summary of the highlights of insights from actual people. And so what we did was, based on these conversations that we've been having on a regular weekly basis with designers and asking them questions about their experience as designers, the things that they're wrestling with, and their opinions on AI, we put the insights that we would have then taken ourselves and created personas with, and put those insights, not the transcripts, the insights that we took, and put that into ChatGPT, and then said, here's some, could you create personas? And even before we do that, I should point out, we asked ChatGPT what should we give you in order to create personas? And it earned our respect by saying, you need really detailed information in these different ways. And that to me is like, if you're wondering how to use ChatGPT, ask it. It's, at least if you're in Canada, it's quite nice about it, and it'll give you detailed instructions. So, it asked for all the right things. We gave them the, general demographics and psychographics and all this sort of information. And then we did a test after it came up with our 3 personas, which I thought were quite strong when I looked at I knew who it was we talked to and what they said. It was solid. But at that point, for science, we asked it the same questions we asked designers to see what did the personas say. And ChatGPT will answer in each of the individual. So we got Michelle and, Dave and Sarah, and each one will answer those questions from their own persona perspective. And I was very happy to see that the responses that came back were very much in keeping with the conversations I'd had with designers. And in fact, all the way down to the fact that when I asked the question about where are you on the 0 to 5, how worried are you about job security in the design industry, there's a follow-up question that I ask about where are you 0 to 5 about your own job. And in general, designers always say they're 1 point higher, more worried in general than they are about their own jobs. So they feel more secure in their own jobs. And ChatGPT predicted this, and like it followed. It kept 1 point difference between those. So there were things that I thought, okay, this makes it interesting for me to continue. And then we started asking it questions that we hadn't asked designers, like, what would your price point be? What would you be willing to pay to get mentorship? We're running a business. We're thinking we could offer mentorship. What should we be charging? I ask designers what they think it should cost. I'm like, now I'm going to ask ChatGPT. But it was more interesting to hear what they said because they were much more detailed than designers tend to be. And it's always weird asking questions about money. So I felt very uncomfortable asking such questions. And then getting the responses back, we could say, well, why did you say this number? And gave the rationale for what it was, doing market research, the experience of the people that you would be mentoring with. What if it was a group? How big is the group size? What kind of topics am I going to be sure they'll talk about things that matter to me? This is what people would say. And I thought, well, that's really helpful. And I said, okay, so what would you pay if I gave you this information and told it real information about how we plan to do mentoring? And it doubled the numbers. Does that mean that I have confirmation people are going to pay double? No. But in a design thinking way, it has certainly given me follow-up questions to ask designers. It's certainly given me hypotheses to then test as a founder to see whether or not there's any validity to it, which is all that to me, that is what all these empathy maps and all the various different things, tools that we use are to help us think. And from my perspective, I'm a heck yes on using ChatGPT for virtual personas because it helped me think of it from many different angles than I had thought of. The same way as if I had another designer in the room giving me feedback. Some of it's obvious, some of it's not as obvious, but it was all very valuable and took me further down the path. So that's a really tangible way that people may not know that they could use ChatGPT. It's not just put in a single sentence and get some sort of response back. You can have longer conversations. You can have interactive scenarios. So that's one of my favorite how to use AI as a UX designer tips or tools.
I'll build on something that may be of interest to your audience in particular is using ChatGPT on the job hunt. This is another article that we put out a couple of weeks ago. I had an interview earlier this year for a UX director position, and it was in a place that offers leadership training, in particular to other companies. And so I sort of asked. I started. I applied for the role. You can get ChatGPT's help on your resume. Like you can lift out a bit and say, "This sounds unimpressive. How can you rewrite it?" And say, "Oh, well, give some stats and give some specific examples," and you give it back and say, "It's this." "Oh, that's great. You're doing a good job." It's always giving you that encouragement that you're doing a nice job. But you can get it to help you with your cover letter, etc. But I actually used it a little bit differently, and I said, "Tell me about this company," because they've been around long enough that the training for ChatGPT 3.5 stopped in like September of 2021 or something. So there's certain things it doesn't know. The new version can go online and look stuff up. But I said, "Tell me about this company." It's like, "Oh, they started in '85. They do this and this, blah, blah, blah." And I'm like, "Oh, are they publicly or privately traded?" "Oh, privately, which means they can make their own decisions, da, da, da." And I was like, "This is great." And I, at a certain point, I just took the entire job description right out of the posting and I pasted it into ChatGPT and I said, "I'm a creative director applying for this role. Ask me the first interview question. You're the hiring manager." And it was like, "Tell me about your experience with adult learning paradigms and blah, blah, blah." And I was like, okay. So I wrote an answer to it. I hit send. And it does what ChatGPT does, which is like, "Good answer. By connecting this and that, you've shown your expertise in this area." And I was like, cool. How could it be better? It was like, "Oh, we'll come up with specific examples and metrics where you did this and show how you made a difference." I was like, "Okay, here's an addendum to my answer." And then it's like, "Good, now you've done this." I say, "Next question. Tell me about a time when," and then I would And so I kept doing this, and I got to the point where I was like, this is good, but typing everything out is not what's going to happen in the interview. I need to say it out loud. So instead, I went to my phone and I would use ChatGPT on here, and I'd say, next question. It would ask me the question. And then instead of typing, I would hit the mic button on the keyboard and just say it all out loud. And it would transcribe it, and then I would hit send, and I would get my responses. It was so good. I was so over prepared. I can't even tell you. Like, I had fielded so many tough questions, and I had gotten feedback on every single one of them, and I'd made them better. And like, by the time I got to the interview, it just felt like a bunch of softballs, you know? It's like, that's all you got? Man, I'm so over prepared for this. So, yeah, I think ChatGPT is just an excellent, it can be a really excellent collaborator for things like that, or for on the job hunt. Again, we've got an article about that if people want to check it out. If you know you've got an interview with the people, you can actually ask about those people, get some background, maybe you've got something in common.
I will add to that, vet your answers, right? Like, you have to vet the answers, because as it says right underneath, it gets a little creative with the stats and the facts. So you definitely want to check, but it can give you that first start that speeds up that research that you were doing on the company or the people that are involved, and then you can go from there.
Yeah, sounds like another segment of professionals or consultants is is gonna is going to have to adjust, because you're replacing like career coaches and like interview prep consultants, because it has been quite popular, especially in the tech world in North America, with like bigger demands, right? Yeah, yeah.
Well, and it gives you the chance to do some of that stuff privately as well, right? I mean, not private, it's sharing it with like Sam Altman and everybody at OpenAI, but but you are getting to do it at home, whereas there are some people who might not reach out to a career consultant, or not have the funds to be able to do that and to be able to access ChatGPT. I would recommend that people, if they can afford it, to get ChatGPT Plus and use 4. It is a big difference between 3.5 and 4 for all the things we've talked about. I personally wouldn't do the persona development, for instance, inside 3.5. There is a big leap in its reasoning and its decrease in its making up. Its being creative with the facts has been decreased significantly in that upgrade. So it makes the difference. I think it's $20 US a month is probably the cheapest. If you think about like what it costs for this is terrible, but I'm going to say it's the cheapest VA that you're going to ever hire, talking about like putting other people out of work, right? Like, it is, for me, it has been like all the things that I would have wanted. If I hired a VA, I've been able to get a lot of that type of stuff from ChatGPT. So it's been a great value, other than just using it for these individual use cases.
But this goes back to this notion of, yes, maybe I don't need to hire a career coach, but I can get a lot of the way there on my own, right? And I, the thing about ChatGPT is that it knows almost the entirety of human written knowledge. You just really need to guide it. And I think a lot of the reason I say it's like both more and less powerful than people think is it's been hyped to where it's, you just give it a sentence and it's magic and it's done. But you need to approach it where, like, okay, that was the first effort. Let's change this, right? That was pretty good, but now reframe your answer this way, right? Or as Suzanne mentioned earlier, this is what I want from you. What would be the best way to get there? And ask it, right? So, for example, a great example I heard is you could say to ChatGPT, where should I go for vacation? It'll be like, I don't know, go to Hawaii. Here's all the reasons. That's great, but that's so generic. If instead you said, I have 3 kids, one of them loves the beach, this one's allergic to shellfish, I've got $3,000 and this one doesn't like to fly, and, then you get something even better. Or the next level to that is you go, I want to know where to go on vacation, but I've got a lot of dietary and budget concerns. I need you to ask me a series of questions until you get to the point where you feel you can give me a good recommendation. And then you sit back and you let it do that, right? So it's all in how you approach it. I liken it to what we used to call Google Foo, which is like how to get good search results out of Google. It's not usually the thing that that you want to search for is not always what you put in. You have to second guess, how would everybody else be talking about this online, and figure out what those terms are to get to it. It's a bit like that. You have to kind of think past what it's offering to help guide it in a certain way.
Amazing. I think like the last comment that you said about like really almost treating it as an assistant, right? And like basically, what do you need to know about me, right? It's and like and it generates the questions as well. So it's I haven't tried it actually. I'm going to try. But you're totally right about the like almost like peeling the onion, right? So when I think through all my experiments and like conversations with ChatGPT, every single one is like an endless list of questions, like and back and forth, and like rewriting, clarifications, changing. Like, no, give me more, give me other alternatives with like this, that, and it's definitely it's never, I guess, satisfactory from the first answer. So it's really a conversation, and I feel that the more I have been using this, the more, maybe just because seeing that the quality of the results, the quality of the output increases with every next like layer deeper of the question, or like the more parameters or more conditions, like you're saying, like with shellfish. And I think, you're totally right. And I think, even like analyzing my experience with this, initially I also started like with everyone else, like maybe like I guess the mainstream users, with just like one simple question or like one sentence, and then okay, that's not exactly what I was looking for. Let me give a bit more criteria for the answer, or like more constraints, right? And then like okay, that text actually is better. So it's almost like it's training me on the way to communicate with it, and kind of to get the better result. So I think it's a matter of time when people will learn to kind of go deeper. But obviously, the prompt engineers, from what I've seen of their examples, that's like I don't know how much you have to experiment to come up with that level of details. That's very impressive, yeah. But definitely different type of the different, I guess, level of fidelity of the results. And again, but a good point about Suzanne, you said about double checking the information, because one of one of the examples that stuck with me, when I tried, I think I gave like a URL of a YouTube video and asked to summarize it, and it generated an amazing, really detailed, with all data points, with like names, situations, like scenes explained. Like it's almost like the whole book was written for a completely different video, which had zero resemblance, like no like even zero clue.
I asked it also to give some examples of tools where people had used AI in significant design projects. And it gave me three. And one of them, I was like, I'm sure I've heard about that. So it felt real. And I was like, but wait, don't, like, I need some little like thing sitting on my shoulder to remind me, because what it's really good at is creating answers that look and feel like real answers. And so I had to say, wait, are these answers correct? Were these real or factual? Did you create? I mean, you can't ask if it's correct, because it could also come back with a creative answer to that. But it does try to answer your question. So I think I said, are these fictional? Are these fictional, or are they from your database of like historical facts? And it was like, oh no, like they weren't. And it blends the truth. This is why people are so worried about, of course, misinformation, because it did a great job of blending things that were like, this is real, but they haven't actually applied it to anything. And so it had said, this is a real tool, and here's the way in which they used it, and that part was fictional. So you really do have to be careful. That's why I think of it as like an ideation tool, or a less of a fact-based thing. Although I do use it as an initial in research, I will use it as an initial starting point, because it'll often get me further down into my Google foo faster than if I could have done by myself, even though I'm like, oh, I went down that rabbit hole that ChatGPT, had put me on, that wasn't actually factual. But it does tend to still create a valuable output as long as you're careful about chat.
Yeah, and Suzanne mentioned that it's a member of our team now, and it's totally true. Like we think of it as a collaborator, and one of the things that we hear from designers is that AI can't ideate. That's one of the places where we hear from them that they feel like they're totally safe because you still need people to come up with ideas, and yet we'll use it to literally generate ideas. Like as a test, we were like, hey, let's ask it to generate an icon for a phone app about water conservation in your house or something. So we said, give us 10 icons like that. And it came up with 10 things. And, some of them were okay. A lot of them were
Descriptions.
terrible.
It came up with 10 descriptions of
10
icons, not
descriptions,
actual
like
icons.
describing an app. Yeah, sorry, can't actually render them yet. Multimodal is the next big step. Talk about that another time. But it would come up with some stuff that was great and some that was like, no, I can't fit an entire faucet and a whale and a tree in a 40 by 40 icon or whatever, And we'd come back, we'd say, you can't have this much detail. Please don't show plumbing. Please don't do this. And it took maybe 5, 6 iterations of correcting it until it started to get to the same stuff that her and I had come up with from the beginning on our own. So again, it's like, if you can guide it right, you can get it there. And we had another instance recently where a client came to us looking for a big printed document for something, and we thought this might make a lot more sense as a microsite because they could search it, you could look at it on your phone, and it wouldn't be a bad experience. And we were going to write it, and instead we just went to ChatGPT and said, like, hey, what are some reasons why to do a microsite? And it was like, and it's like, yes, these are all, we would have gotten to all of these in a 45-minute discussion. But this is like, God, you ticked so many of the boxes, and now I can just rewrite it. And I know that this is right. You're just helping me get there faster, right? So
I think about using these tools creatively as well. I think we've given a few really strong examples of ways that you might not have thought to use them that can be helpful. Even what Kirk's describing with the icons and having to go back, and what yourself, Kirill, have said about how you go back and you ask it, okay, I got to change the constraints. These experiences are very similar to learning how to manage designers, because they come back with their results and you have to explain, often in async environments, how it's not quite what you were looking for. So you can also look at these experiences. Sometimes when we do mentoring, it's like you've got a goal to move up and get a promotion, become like a design leader. What are all the ways that you could be practicing your skills now to get to that later, so you can actually start moving towards that goal this week, not just when you get that promotion or when you get an opportunity to ask for that promotion. But if you look at what the skills are to be a design leader, one of them is the ability to direct others. Well, every interaction that you have with ChatGPT is an opportunity for you to practice that. Like, how can I get more and more clear about what it is I'm looking for, or when you get unexpected results back, how can you guide them to the right place? Or the same as Kirk was doing before, I've said some people were like, well, I'm interacting with developers and I don't understand what they're saying, and I want to feel more confident about what I'm saying in conversation and be taken more seriously. Said, okay, next time they've come in with something you don't understand, copy that. If it's like in an email or in Slack, put it into ChatGPT and say, please translate this geek speak into like plain language. And they did that. They gave that a try and tried it out. And somebody else was like, oh, I did what you said, and I tried out, I had to write an email to a client. Normally that'd take me like half an hour to figure out the right phrasing. I put in my like awkwardly written off the top of my head text and then asked it to make it into a more professional version. And they got back what they needed, and they were off and working on their next task within 5 minutes instead of like 45 minutes. And those are the ways when people are like, oh, I want it to shorten my, make things easier, give me, get rid of the drudge work. Sometimes those things are available right now. You just aren't thinking of the tools that are already available to you. to find those time savings. So it's not always going to be like a tool that lands perfectly inside your already used Adobe or Figma system in a way that's brand new. It might be something where you just have to go, oh, okay, I've been using ChatGPT for this other reason. Now I'm going to see whether or not I can think about what is it good at and see where I can expand further, or look around to see what other people are using, other creative ways that people are using this in their jobs, because all the practice you're doing right now is what will give you an edge for keeping your job as these conversations start coming up. And we all know how that'll happen. It'll be in these meetings, it'll be in your day-to-day work or a conversation with a client when you have the answer to a question that was revolving around AI that somebody else never thought of and hasn't been paying attention. And so they're not even able to join the conversations that people are having. So every single way that you can think to try and weave some of these tools in, one, they become more familiar. Two, they can be a lot of fun. And three, they give you that little bit of an edge that as the future starts to unfold, you know which ways to start to lean in and put more effort in one tool or another tool, but you haven't been completely just waiting to find out where the pack is going. And then I'll just wait till it all settles. That's the other thing is people are like, I'm going to wait till it all settles and then I'll join. But there'll be so much along the way that you've missed. So that's probably the most important. It's not which tool are you using, it's just, are you using them at all? Are you experimenting and are you getting familiar with them and pushing the boundaries? That would be probably my biggest, around tools, that would be my biggest suggestion.
I wanted to mention I've also used it to start doing some coding. Like I've got some coding experience, but I've had this idea for a few months now where I want to automate the creation of art. I want ChatGPT to describe a piece of art. I want to send that to the DALL-E API and render it. I want to pull it back. I want to get a critique from another AI, and then I want all that to go up on social. Once a day, new piece of art kind of thing. That's the idea. APIs and Python and stuff, not really my thing. So I just said to ChatGPT, here's what I want to do. And it was like, oh, here's 10 steps. And they were way too high level. And I was like, okay, slow down. How do I know if I have Python installed? Okay, open your terminal, type this. I typed it. This is what it says. Oh, if it's saying that, you probably have to install it. Go over here and do this, right? And just, it took all night, but step by step by step, I could go, oh, it's throwing this error. Oh, well, that error probably means this. Okay. And, and eventually I can get it all happening, right? At the end of the day, I may not have learned a huge understanding of how to use OpenAI's API using Python, and yet I can get it up and running.
Yeah, but do you really have to get to this level of understanding when you have tools that now require a few hours to get it, but like in 3 years it will, I don't know, do it more magically?
Yeah, I think in 2 years you'll just say, "Hey, this is what I want to do," and it'll go, "Here's your app."
Probably, yeah, probably will be kind of maybe a few prompts like this or that, and like which features like this. Okay, done. Yeah, I saw like about coding because this is one of the risks I see for engineering because it's so also very technical and very structured field, right? Even though there is always a creative problem solving, but still coding like is I think at least looking at the current tools is not out of the out of this universe the idea to automate. I saw a video when a person who has zero coding skills could, using ChatGPT and Midjourney, I think, could hack together a game, like on almost like in a streaming, like live streaming, and then share the video. It was, yeah.
I saw that. Also, OpenAI has a tool called Codex that does do this. So they put out a demo during the pandemic, and it's two of the lead developers. And they're like, let's make a game where like rocks fall from the top of the screen and you have to dodge it. And they use plain language. This is the demo, and they're like, okay, now the rock should fall. And they're like, oh, it falls too fast. Make the rock fall slower. And then the right, you can see the code, and it's changing the variable for like how much to move the rock per frame, and it's changing the size of the rock or whatever. And so they're just saying, okay, if it hits the guy, then lose a point or whatever. They never speak in code. They speak completely in plain English, and they're like, no, I don't like that. Make it like this, and they can watch the code update. And so I think you're right. I think that future is actually coming a lot sooner than we may think.
Yeah. It's exciting, but again, like going back to the concern, the bigger concern of what will happen with different jobs that kind of exist today, and uh, this is the last point, and then we'll go to the last question. And I kind of always question the question from the AI optimists, and like, not specifically AI optimists, but the new disruptive technology optimists, let's put it this way, that historically every new disruptive technology was creating more jobs than it was replacing or removing, right? And I agree, and this is kind of completely makes sense. And historically, I mean, it's more likely that it will happen this way. However, with this particular time, I'm not that sure that it will create as many, because like the level of automation and like effort, reducing effort to create um, all these activity actions, tasks, I think is just like plummeted, right? Or will be plummeting across hundreds of thousands of different jobs and professions. So I'm not buying this argument. Okay, I'm not convinced by this argument. Let's put it this way. Even though I understand that my bias is also about like, oh, what will happen, and like every previous wave was the same. There were a bunch of people that were also concerned. But yeah, it's
I,
tricky.
I
It's tricky.
I agree with you, Kirill. I mean, I think whenever I have a long enough conversation with a designer or anybody, frankly, about what's possible with this stuff, like we're seeing, lawyers are losing their jobs, and or at least people are offering cheaper, lawyer services because they're using ChatGPT, things like that, right? The list of what it can do is 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 really impressive, and every time I have a conversation that goes long enough, we end up talking about universal basic income. So like that's where it ends up. It's like we get to a point where like, I can, as a designer, I can do a design and then I build a presentation deck, and now I'm going to spend the next day or two putting in my design rationale and my mood boards and my whatever and all the rest. Or maybe I just get an AI to just generate all that, right? And there's certain circles out there now that are talking about like, gee, I feel like this thing is so good at simulating my job that I'm starting to realize that my job was a little bit of a simulation. Maybe a lot of what I was doing was a lot of this and this to impress clients or do whatever, when really you could get to that a lot quicker, maybe. And it just starts to beg the question of like, where is the real value in a lot of these roles? And what do we do when we can't employ everybody, perhaps?
Funny you say about the universal basic income. This was one of my questions that I wanted to touch on, but we ran out of time, and yeah, we haven't covered like all the questions. Yeah, this is like super exciting topic, and yeah, lots of pros and cons, and obviously lots of like I see like in the short term, it will be lots of positive change in the reducing effort for tedious and manual and like not as enjoyable tasks, which hopefully will free up some time, and we'll be able to focus on more strategic systems building, like all this stuff. So I think in the short term, so it's I'm super excited about this. In the longer term, yeah, universal basic income and what will happen, and yeah, all the whole idea also about like midterm probably problem is commoditization of skills. So, for example, you have to learn like 5 years in university, right? And just again, last thought. You have to learn in the university for 5 years to get to this specific skill set level to get a job, right? Now you can graduate high school, even like not finish high school, with ChatGPT and a few other tools stitched together. You can do the same job for like half price. And then if you think like of the number of people that would be able to join the skills, right? Like offer their skills, I think it like the risk I see, and like again another point to the universal basic income, at least idea or some kind of idea to explore, is the price on the labor will drop if we kind of if we follow this kind of market dynamics reality. The more demand with the same skills, like cheaper, like it will become commodity at some point, I think.
Well, what's interesting about this idea is you need somebody in the room to make sure that what is being generated makes sense, right? So it's not everything gets removed. I was listening to the Lex Friedman podcast. They were talking about this idea, and I thought, oh, I've got to make a meme, which of course I used Midjourney well, I used a combination of ChatGPT and Midjourney to create a meme. It was about this idea of like a Noah's Ark, but it's like two of every profession, two humans in every profession, two doctors walking along, two graphic designers walking along, being, well, that's all they really needed was just a couple of people to verify that the prompts are coming out accurately. And we were all getting on. So who's like jockeying to get those two spots that are going to be left? And yeah, hopefully there's universal basic income for the rest of us if we don't make it
Yeah,
on the arc. It's
that's actually a good idea for a meme. I think you should post it. This would be funny, but also kind of deep thoughts invoking. Okay, so last question. It's hard to stop this talking about this topic. If money wasn't a question, what would you do?
I'll go first. I would be doing exactly this. This is what I was already doing. I was sitting around exploring AI. I was mentoring some people. Was doing a bit of speaking and stuff on the side. I was writing, and at a certain point, it was kind of like, can't I just keep doing this for a while? How do I just do this? Like, this is what I really want to do. So honestly, if money weren't an issue, I'd be doing the same thing. I would still be exploring AI. I would still be learning it. I would still be wanting to mentor designers. I'd still be wanting to talk about this. I have an active art practice that now incorporates AI, and so I've used DALL-E to make these like really like 10,000 by 10,000 pixel canvases. 10,000 by 10,000. Anyway, they're like 10 by 10 inches at 500 DPI or something. They're ridiculous. But DALL-E will let you like render a patch and then move to a blank spot. And as long as there's a little overlap, your next prompt will blend seamlessly. And so you can eventually stitch together like a huge illustration. And I've been using different programs to do video editing. And so I've done some experiments lately where I ask ChatGPT for like a script or a storyline. I feed the lines into an AI that does voice synthesis. I ask ChatGPT to describe the characters and the backgrounds. I pick the ones I like, render them in Midjourney, pull the character out into an AI application that will do voice sync. So I generate a voice and then I have the voice sync happen and then I edit it all together in After Effects. And so like I'm turning into a one person like film studio, right? I can do set design, costume design, characters, writing, all the rest. And I just want to keep doing that. So I'm like, maybe we can find ways to offer tutorials on that stuff, etc. Because this is what I would be doing.
absolutely. I'm in a exactly this space as well. I've probably spent my entire career figuring out how do you chart a career where you get to do what you love and you use that Venn diagram of like what does the market need and what do you love and are really good at and find that sweet spot in between and stay in that zone. And I'm just doing more of that now. I'm like, okay, I'll position myself here because I've got this burning interest in what's going on in this area. And if I could keep doing that, if I had enough money to go even deeper, that's what I would do. Dive further into how can I do what I love in order to help other people figure out how to do what they love, whether that's a designer or a founder trying to figure out their path or their product that they're trying to create. I just think that combination of design, psychology, tech, art, and then educating is just so compelling. So yeah, I would just onwards and upwards. That would be my answer.
Sounds good. And where can people find you?
You can reach us at designunicorn.ai.
You'll find the newsletter there and links to our articles and our bios and coaching, things like
Awesome. Okay, so this was a fantastic conversation. I learned a lot, got scared a lot, got
that.
excited a lot as well. So it's really was a roller coaster of emotions. Thank you for this. But yeah, I appreciate you coming and then sharing insiders because you obviously have been playing with this longer than I did and lots of other folks. So you have more deeper understanding of how things work, how they can bring more value to people and to designers particularly. And yeah, appreciate you sharing with us.
Hey, thank you so much for having us. And I just wanted to say I'm glad you learned some things. It's all going to be irrelevant in a week. Just
That's true.
so uh,
Exactly.
Fast-paced environment as it is.
indeed. But hey, that's the business we're in. You know what? One thing I'll mention just for your audience particulars, I have maintained throughout my career that the design industry and especially digital design changes all the time. It changes faster every year. You need to be a lifelong learner. You need to be good with always kind of building the plane as you fly it, right? So this treadmill, just to mix metaphors, this treadmill goes faster every year. And if you're somebody who just wants to do one thing all day, this might not be the field, right? But if you're interested in staying on top of challenges and finding these new opportunities and constantly changing how you package yourself and what you're focused on, there's not a faster moving field right now, really.
Awesome. Okay. Have a good day to you, and talk to you soon.
All
Thank
right,
you.
take care. Thanks again.